You realize too late, and your whole body drops before your face has time to react. Someone is smiling at you, and you already know what you forgot without asking anything. Their birthday came and went, and your mind somehow never stopped to hold on to it. No reminder saved you, and no last-minute message arrived to soften what already happened. Just that slow, terrible moment where guilt reaches you before language possibly can. And now you have to act normal while your brain starts building excuses at full speed. Because forgetting a birthday never feels like forgetting a date and leaving it there. It feels like forgetting to prove that someone mattered in the way they hoped you would. That is why this kind of mistake feels heavier than logic says it should. And for some people, the shame begins long before they even say sorry. Most people assume forgetting birthdays means the person simply does not care enough to remember. That is the surface interpretation, and unfortunately, it is also the one that hurts the most. Because birthdays are treated like emotional proof in a way few other dates really are. Remember it, and you are thoughtful, warm, loyal, and emotionally present in their life. Forget it, and suddenly your entire character feels open to silent redefinition. But that explanation is often too shallow for what is actually happening underneath. Some people do not forget birthdays because they lack love or emotional depth at all. They forget because their mind does not naturally assign weight to abstract calendar markers. A date without ritual repetition or strong context can remain mentally fragile for them. It matters emotionally, but it does not always arrive in memory with enough structure. And that gap between caring deeply and remembering reliably creates the real tension. Because now the question is no longer whether the person cares in some vague sense. The real question is why genuine affection can fail to translate into timely recall. Why can someone remember your pain, your voice, your habits, and still miss the date? And once you understand that, the whole behavior starts looking very different. To understand this, you have to look at how memory actually decides what gets stored and what fades. The brain is not built to preserve every fact with equal loyalty or emotional seriousness. It holds on more easily to things that carry meaning, imagery, pattern, or immediate consequence. A birthday sounds important socially, but in raw cognitive terms, it is often just a number. And numbers by themselves are surprisingly weak unless they connect to something already alive. A date like April 9th means very little if it floats there without story or ritual. It does not always create a vivid image, a felt memory, or a strong mental association. So even when the person matters deeply, the date itself may still remain strangely rootless. That is why someone can remember your favorite food or the night you almost broke down. They may remember what you wore once or a sentence you said that stayed with them. But the birthday sits elsewhere in the mind with less emotional texture attached to it. This creates a painful contradiction because care is present but recall still fails on time. The problem is not always affection, and it is not always effort in the moral sense. Sometimes the brain simply stores human texture more naturally than symbolic calendar data. And once you see that, the forgetting starts to look less cold and more specific. This becomes even more likely when a person lives mentally inside the pressure of the present. Some minds are organized around what is urgent now rather than what is approaching quietly. They remember what demands attention today, what feels unfinished, what still needs managing. A birthday often arrives differently because it asks for anticipation before it asks for action. It depends on noticing time early enough to prepare emotion before the moment has passed. For people with associative or overloaded minds, that kind of tracking is often less natural. Their memory moves through feelings, stories, interruptions, concerns, and unfinished internal dialogue. So unless the birthday is linked to a strong routine, it can drift outside awareness. Not because it meant nothing, but because it never became active soon enough to return. This is why some people are deeply affectionate, yet strangely unreliable with dates and timing. They feel closeness in conversation, presence, detail, and shared emotional memory more than schedule. Their care lives vividly in human moments, but less visibly in calendar-based obligations. And when social life keeps using dates as evidence of love, the difference creates shame. Because the person may fail at the ritual while still holding the relationship with depth. What looks like indifference from the outside may actually be a mismatch in mental structure. This is where the topic becomes more personal and more uncomfortable for many people. Chronic birthday forgetters are often not emotionally distant but mentally preoccupied instead. Their attention is pulled inward by stress, self-monitoring, unfinished thoughts, or daily survival. While life keeps moving, their mind stays busy managing whatever feels loudest in the moment. And quiet future dates rarely compete well against pressure that already feels immediate. So the birthday does not vanish because the person mattered too little to remember at all. It vanishes because the mind was already crowded before the date had a chance to land. That is an important difference because it shifts the issue from morality to mental bandwidth. But people rarely interpret it that way, especially when they are the ones forgotten. They interpret it as evidence that they were less present in your emotional priorities. And many forgetful people start believing that story too, which deepens the private shame. They begin seeing themselves as unreliable, cold, disappointing, or quietly defective in relationships. Not because they do not love deeply, but because they fail at visible social markers. And over time, that repeated failure can start distorting how they judge their own heart. What they carry is often not indifference, but the guilt of caring in the wrong format. It is also worth saying something honest about the people on the other side of this. Having your birthday forgotten does hurt, and it often hurts more than logic can justify. It lands like a quiet message that your place in someone's life was not held securely. Even when that interpretation is wrong emotionally, it can still feel instantly and deeply true. So the pain should not be dismissed just because the forgetting may have another explanation. But memory has never been a clean moral ranking of who mattered most to the heart. It stores fragments, feelings, details, patterns, and impressions with strange selective intensity. Some people forget the date, yet remember the tone of your voice when you felt low. They remember what made you laugh once, what you feared, or what changed you that year. They may hold your emotional texture more clearly than the number tied to your birth. That does not erase the sting of being forgotten, but it changes what the forgetting means. The mind is not always best at preserving the symbols society uses to measure affection. Sometimes it preserves the living substance of a person while dropping the formal marker. And that difference matters because love is not always remembered in the shape of a date. Sometimes it survives more vividly in the feeling of who you were to someone. None of this means a person cannot get better at remembering birthdays with intention. Calendars, reminders, rituals, and simple associations can build the structure memory often needs. But the deeper point is that forgetting a birthday does not always mean forgetting a person. Sometimes it means the mind failed at timing, while the heart still held on to substance. Some people remember care through presence, detail, feeling, and emotional residue before dates. So if this pattern has ever made you question your warmth, do not end the story there. You may not be careless in the way you feared, only wired differently under social expectation. And once you understand that you can improve the habit without turning it into self-hatred. If this kind of psychology puts words to things you have felt quietly for years, subscribe. There is a lot more to understand about the mind than most people were ever taught.